It started with a bark, not the kind you hear when a dog's chasing a squirrel or trying to beg for a treat. No, this was different. This was a canine bark, sharp, focused, urgent, the kind that doesn't stop until someone listens. In the dense pine forest outside Pine Hollow, Montana, Deputy Sheriff Dana Brooks knew that bark all too well. She'd spent 4 years with Scout, her German shepherd partner, trained in search and rescue, narcotics, and tracking. Scout didn't bark for nothing, but today he wouldn't stop. He had frozen mid-step in a thicket off an old fire road, his ears pinned back, hackles raised. Then, with no hesitation, he sprinted into the woods and began clawing at something under a fallen tree. At first, Dana thought it was just another rusted-out truck or abandoned hunting trailer. That wasn't unusual in these parts. Locals dumped all kinds of junk out here. But as she approached and pushed the brush aside, her heart caught in her throat. It was a vehicle, an ambulance, old, faded. The once red striping had turned a bruised shade of pink. The tires were flat, and the body was rusted through in patches. Moss crept up the windshield like ivy on an old chapel. "What the hell?" she muttered, pulling her radio to her mouth. "Unit 3 to base. I've got something. Looks like an ambulance, maybe decommissioned. Send backup and medics. We might need both." Scout was now scratching violently at the back doors, barking with an edge Dana had never heard before. Not even during drug busts or live apprehensions. He was telling her something. "Hold up, buddy." She gripped the door handle. It creaked, jammed. She yanked it again. It gave. The hinges groaned, and inside was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, lying on a stretcher, motionless. His lips were pale, his tiny chest rising and falling so faintly she could barely see it. Dana dropped to her knees beside him, heart pounding. "Eli? Oh God, is it you?" She fumbled for her radio. "Confirmed. I found the boy. Eli Monroe. He's here, still alive but unconscious. Get me EMS right now." Scout sat down beside the stretcher, silent now, like he knew his job was done, at least for today. 3 days earlier, the entire county had launched into crisis mode. A 6-year-old boy had vanished from his own backyard. His mother had turned her head for 10 minutes to grab laundry, and when she came back, he was gone. No signs of forced entry. No neighbors saw anything. No footprints beyond the yard. And just like that, Eli Monroe disappeared. News helicopters hovered over the town for 48 hours. Volunteers spread out on ATVs. The FBI sent in 2 agents. Nothing turned up. Dana had brought Scout into the search on day 3, when everyone else had started losing hope. But Scout hadn't. Scout had picked up a trail from the boy's sock left behind in the yard, a trail that meandered into the woods and ended at that rotting ambulance buried under branches. No one knew how long it had been there, and no one knew how Eli had gotten inside. The hospital was 20 minutes away, and it felt like forever. Dana rode in the front while Scout sat beside the gurney in the back, refusing to leave the boy's side. The paramedic had tried to shoo him away, but Dana shook her head. "He stays." At the ER, nurses flooded the trauma bay. Fluids, oxygen, heart monitor. The boy didn't wake, but his vitals were stable. "That dog found him?" one nurse asked. "He saved him," Dana said, placing her hand on Scout's thick fur. "He didn't give up." She stood in the hallway for a moment, staring through the glass as they worked on the boy. Her mind buzzed with questions. The biggest one of all: who left a child in an abandoned ambulance in the middle of the forest? If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where courage has 4 legs and a heartbeat. It wasn't long before the puzzle got stranger. When technicians ran the ambulance's VIN, it came back unregistered. No records, no ownership. Scrubbed clean. The logo decals had been scraped off, and even the license plates were missing. It was as if someone didn't just want to hide the vehicle. They wanted to erase it. Inside, beyond the stretcher, investigators found a half-empty bottle of pediatric sedatives and an insulated lunchbox with 2 unopened juice boxes. No fingerprints, no ID. Eli's shoes were on the floor beside the stretcher. His t-shirt, blue, with a cartoon dinosaur, was torn at the shoulder, but there were no bruises, no scratches, no obvious signs of harm. And still the boy didn't speak. "Has he said anything?" Dana asked the attending physician 2 days later. The doctor shook her head. "Not a word. He's alert now, eating, blinking, but no speech, no crying either. He's still." They brought in a child trauma specialist. The verdict? Shock. Deep, silent, terrifying shock. He may not remember how he got there, the psychologist explained. Or he remembers too much. Eli wouldn't even look at photos of his mother or father. But he would respond to one thing, Scout. Every time the German shepherd entered the room, Eli's fingers would curl slightly. His eyes would track Scout's movements. And when Scout rested his head beside the boy's leg, Eli closed his eyes and slept peacefully. It was like Scout had become his guardian. Back at the sheriff's office, Dana stared at the whiteboard they'd set up. Timeline, suspects, location, vehicle, motive. Nothing fit. Until a rookie deputy asked quietly, "Do we know for sure Eli was supposed to be the only one?" Dana turned to him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged nervously. "I mean, if it was a kidnapping, why leave him alive? And why there? What if something went wrong and he was never meant to be found?" The words hit Dana like a hammer. Scout, lying by her desk, suddenly sat up. His ears twitched. She turned to him slowly. "Scout, what else did you smell out there?" The ambulance hadn't moved in years. Investigators had to use a flatbed tow truck just to pull it from the mud. Rust had eaten away the undercarriage, and pine needles poured from the roof like brittle confetti every time someone opened a door. But as eerie as the vehicle looked, it wasn't what chilled Sheriff Dana Brooks to the bone. It was what was missing. No registration, no emergency radio, no onboard computer, no patient records. Nothing to suggest this was ever part of a licensed fleet. Just a cold metal shell, stripped of everything except one stretcher and the unconscious body of a 6-year-old boy. Dana stood beside the vehicle, arms crossed tight, as a forensics tech dusted the rear doors for prints. "You ever seen anything like this?" she asked. "Not since the old smuggling cases," the tech muttered. "But even those weren't this clean. Whoever set this up, they planned it. Every detail." Scout lay on the ground a few feet away, his eyes locked on the tree line. He hadn't barked since they found the boy, but he hadn't relaxed either. His posture was stiff, watchful, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Later that evening, the Monroe family was reunited in the hospital. Technically. Eli was awake now, sitting up in bed and sipping apple juice through a straw. His mother, Rachel, wept softly at his side, brushing his hair back with trembling fingers. But he didn't respond to her touch, or her voice. He just stared straight ahead at nothing. "I keep talking to him," she whispered to Dana. "But it's like he's gone. Like he's not there anymore." Dana didn't know what to say. She'd seen kids shut down before, especially after trauma. But this wasn't dissociation. This felt deeper, intentional. Like a wall had gone up inside him and whatever was on the other side didn't want to come back. The only time Eli showed any sign of life was when Scout entered the room. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but he reached out, slowly, deliberately, and rested his hand on the dog's back. That was all. The following morning, Dana met with Agent Collins from the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. He was blunt, older, wore a suit that looked like it hadn't been dry cleaned since the Obama administration, and he didn't bother sugarcoating anything. "You're looking at something organized," he said, flipping through the photos of the ambulance. This wasn't some random predator dumping a kid in the woods. That's a tactical vehicle, scrubbed from every traceable record. Someone planned to hide that boy in plain sight. Dana leaned forward. "Then why leave him alive?" Collins raised an eyebrow. "You sure they meant to?" That shut her up. Scout was restless again by day 3. Dana took him back out to the site where they found the ambulance, half expecting it to be pointless. The whole area had been combed over already, by dogs, deputies, and drones. But Scout didn't follow the old trail. He made a new one. He darted northeast of the original scene, across a dry creek bed, and through a thicket of trees that led to a steep slope covered in bramble and moss. At first, Dana didn't see what he was after. But then Scout stopped and began clawing again. This time, not at a vehicle, at the earth itself. A shovel confirmed it. A shallow pit had been dug, maybe 4 feet deep, hastily covered with pine needles and dirt. Inside, they found plastic bags, a dirty blanket, an empty juice box, a child's sock, and something that made Dana's stomach turn over, a pacifier. Too small for a 6-year-old. She radioed for backup. "Get a forensics team out here. This wasn't just a dump site. This was a holding area." Back at the sheriff's office, the evidence began painting a darker picture. A fingerprint was lifted from the inside of the ambulance's dashboard. Not enough to identify a subject directly, but enough for the FBI to cross-reference with unsolved case files. While they waited, Dana sat in her office staring at the whiteboard filled with photos, timelines, theories, none of which made sense yet, until she noticed something strange in the corner of one of the stretcher photos. A sticker. Faded, peeling. It had been half covered by the stretcher frame. She zoomed in on the image. It was a hospital ID code, but not local. Greenfield Medical. 3 states over in Nebraska. "What the hell are you doing all the way out here?" she whispered. She called the hospital the next morning. The administrator confirmed the ambulance had once been part of their fleet, but had been decommissioned and sold at auction over 4 years ago. Sold to whom? A man named Victor Sloan. No criminal record, no business license, paid in cash. The address he'd listed was a storage facility, one that had been abandoned last year after a fire. Everything was pointing toward a man who didn't officially exist. Meanwhile, the boy, Eli, had finally spoken. Just one word. Whispered it to a nurse who leaned over to change his IV. "Duke." When Dana heard, she was confused. "You sure that's what he said?" The nurse nodded. "Clear as day. Duke's not a family member?" "Not that we know of." Dana went to Eli's room with a photo album the Monroes had provided. Family members, friends, neighbors. "Eli, sweetheart," she said gently. "Can you point to Duke for me?" He shook his head. But when Scout padded into the room again, Eli reached for him and whispered, "Not him." "Not him? Then who was Duke?" She asked Rachel Monroe if the name meant anything. Rachel froze. "There was a boy named Duke in Eli's class last year. Foster kid. Sweet boy." Dana's eyes narrowed. "Still around?" Rachel shook her head. "No, he got pulled out after a few weeks. Nobody ever said why." Dana's gut twisted. Scout was still pacing the hallway like a sentry. Restless. Focused. Like he hadn't finished his job yet. And maybe he hadn't. That night, Dana pulled the Sheriff's Department database and ran a new query. Missing children. First name, Duke, ages 4 to 8. Last known location, Midwest. There were 16 matches. She clicked on the one from Kansas. Duke Jensen, age 5. Last seen outside his foster home. Case, suspicious circumstances. The photo made her blood run cold, because she'd seen that face before. Not in real life, but in the reflection of a stainless steel surface in one of the ambulance photographs, barely visible beside Eli on the stretcher. A child with dark curly hair. Not Eli, another boy, and he was missing. Sheriff Dana Brooks didn't sleep that night. She stayed in her office, elbows on the desk, face lit by the blue glare of the county computer screen, scrolling through the Kansas case file for a missing boy named Duke Jensen. 5 years old? Disappeared from his foster home in Clay County 7 months ago. Case closed as a runaway. No suspect, no evidence, no follow-up. Just a line in the final report that made Dana's stomach tighten. Child may have left through bedroom window. Siblings were asleep. No signs of forced entry. She'd seen that phrase too many times before. No signs of forced entry. It usually meant we didn't look hard enough. Back at Pine Hollow Regional Hospital, Eli Monroe still hadn't said another word. But something had changed. He no longer stared blankly at the wall. Now he was watching people. His mother, nurses, even the officers stationed outside his room. He was still silent. Still slow to respond, but something behind his eyes had shifted, like a fog was lifting. Scout visited him twice a day, and each time, Eli touched his fur with a gentle but deliberate motion, like grounding himself in something real, something safe. Sheriff Brooks stood by the window on that third day and watched Eli slowly turn his head and look at her directly for the first time. No smile, but no fear either. That was something. Later that afternoon, Dana called the Kansas foster agency that had last reported Duke Jensen missing. The woman on the phone sounded exhausted before the conversation even began. "Oh, Duke? I remember that one," she said with a sigh. "Never should have been placed in that house. But it's not like we have enough beds, you know? The system is underwater." Dana didn't respond. She just let the woman talk. "The foster father said Duke liked to wander. Said he probably ran away. It was winter. The kid didn't even have shoes on. I thought, there's no way he made it far. But, well, we filed the paperwork." "No Amber Alert?" "Didn't meet the criteria. There wasn't enough evidence of an abduction." Dana closed her eyes, jaw clenched. "And you haven't heard anything since?" Not a word. Scout was getting twitchy again. At first, Dana thought maybe he just needed a break, a run, some playtime. But Scout didn't want to play. He paced. He sniffed. He stared at the door to Eli's hospital room and whined in low, quiet notes whenever someone new walked past. He was waiting for someone. Or maybe listening. That night, Dana reviewed every photo from the ambulance site. She zoomed in on the reflective cabinet again, where the stretcher's edge met the metal panel. There it was, the shadowy blur of a second child's face. Not a trick of the light. The outline of curly hair, a pale cheek, a round chin. That wasn't Eli, but if that really was Duke, where was he now? The next morning, the hospital pediatrician called Dana back in. They'd completed a full physical exam on Eli and found something no one had expected. A small RFID chip implanted under the skin of his upper arm. Not medical, not standard. Industrial. It's the kind used in warehouse logistics, the doctor explained, holding it up in a sealed bag. This isn't tracking his heart rate, it's tracking his location. Dana stared at the chip like it was radioactive. Who puts a logistics chip in a child? Human traffickers. That was the only explanation that fit. And suddenly everything snapped into focus. The decommissioned ambulance, the wiped VIN number, the second child in the reflection. The forest wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a drop point. She called Agent Collins from the FBI again. This time, she didn't wait for permission. "I need surveillance on the hospital, now," she said. "Whoever dropped Eli off didn't do it to be merciful. They're still watching, waiting to see if we connect the dots." Collins agreed. By sunset, 3 unmarked SUVs were parked near the emergency entrance. 2 agents were stationed inside the hospital. One was planted in the waiting room dressed like a janitor. Scout, however, wasn't subtle. He paced the hallway, tail low, nose twitching like he could smell something no one else could. Dana followed him out of instinct, and because at this point she trusted Scout more than she trusted most humans. He led her to the hospital chapel, empty at this hour. Scout sniffed the floor, the walls, the benches. Then he sat, perfectly still, facing the air vent in the back corner. Dana tilted her head. "Seriously?" she whispered. "An air duct?" She knelt beside the vent and unscrewed the cover. Inside was a burner phone. No SIM card. Battery removed. But someone had used it to stash something else. A folded Polaroid photo. 2 boys. One was Eli. The other, curly-haired, smaller, was Duke. Behind them, a white van, unmarked. And standing in the background, a man in a medic uniform. The next morning, Eli finally spoke. It was quiet, almost a whisper, but clear. Dana was sitting by his bed, drinking cold coffee and writing notes when she heard it. Duke didn't like the box. She froze. "Eli," she said softly. He blinked. "Duke didn't like the box," he repeated. "It was too loud." Dana leaned closer. "Can you tell me about the box, sweetheart?" Eli looked down. "It shook when we moved." "Moved? You mean in the van?" He nodded. Dana's voice stayed calm, gentle. "Where did the van go?" He shook his head. I don't know where." That was okay. He remembered something. That meant he could remember more. At the sheriff's office, Dana updated the timeline. The ambulance hadn't been a one-time fluke. It was part of a network, mobile, untraceable, and designed to disappear into back roads and national forests. Children weren't taken to houses anymore. They were stored in motion, constantly moved, constantly hidden. Then came the break. The FBI got a hit on a fingerprint pulled from the ambulance's rearview mirror. It belonged to Tyrell Knox, a former EMT from Oklahoma who had lost his license 6 years ago for opioid theft and assaulting a patient. He'd vanished after a plea deal fell through. Hadn't been seen since. Until now, the Bureau issued a federal warrant. Dana pulled out a photo of Knox and showed it to Eli. The boy stared at it. His lip trembled. Then he whispered, "That's the man who locked the doors." It was a match, but there was still one question Dana couldn't shake. If Knox had dropped Eli in the woods, why did Scout lead them to him before anyone else could? Had Scout remembered something from his past? Had he encountered Knox before? And more importantly, was Duke still alive? Scout froze. Not in fear, but in memory. It happened when the ambulance passed outside the hospital. A real one this time, sirens blaring down Main Street toward the ER with a medical emergency on board. Dana Brooks had seen dozens of canine dogs flinch at loud sounds, gunshots, fireworks, engines, but not Scout, not like this. He didn't cower or bark. He stopped walking, sat down. His ears turned stiff, eyes locked toward the window. The fur along his shoulders stood straight up. He wasn't reacting to noise. He was remembering. Dana knelt beside him, heart sinking. "Scout," she whispered. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" He turned his head slowly toward her, and for a moment she swore he looked haunted. Back at the sheriff's office, Dana pulled Scout's full service file. Scout wasn't born a Pine Hollow dog. He'd originally been assigned to the Tulsa Police Department, explosives detection and tactical entry. His handler, Officer Miguel Herrera, had been killed in the line of duty during a raid on a suspected child trafficking house. That case had gone cold. After the raid, Scout had been reassigned, too shaken for active duty, too valuable to be retired. He bounced through 2 departments before finding a home with Dana. She'd never dug into the details. Now she had no choice. The report from the Tulsa raid was brutal. A farmhouse, rural, raided after months of surveillance. 5 suspects arrested. But 1 man fled, a medic impersonator. Suspect fled through woods wearing EMT uniform, the report read. His name? Tyrell Knox, the same man who had dumped Eli in the woods of Montana. So this wasn't a new case. This was the same operation, still alive, still moving, still stealing children. And Scout had been there when it started. That night, Dana sat on the floor beside Scout's dog bed. He was restless again, eyes flicking toward the window, muscles twitching in his sleep. "Tell me what I'm missing," she said softly. "Tell me how far this goes." Scout opened one eye, then the other. He stood up, walked to the door. Then he barked once. Dana followed him into the living room, unsure what he wanted. He went to her bag and pawed at a folder inside. She pulled it out. It was the map of Pine Hollow National Forest, the one they'd used during the search for Eli. Scout pawed again, then sat, staring, not at the place they'd found the ambulance, but miles northwest, near Salt Creek Trailhead. They hiked there the next morning. Dana called it just getting some fresh air, but she wore a vest and carried her sidearm. Scout led the way, nose to the ground, no hesitation. After a mile, he veered off the main trail, through dense pines, over a ridge. Then he stopped, barked twice. Dana stepped through the brush and found a clearing, a burned-out fire pit, cigarette butts, zip ties, a child's shoe. And beside it, buried under a tarp, was another white medical cabinet, like the ones mounted inside ambulances. She pulled it open, empty, except for a faded clipboard with a list of first names, just first names. Eli was one of them. So was Duke, and 4 others she didn't recognize. At the same time, Eli's therapist at the hospital made a breakthrough. She used a toy ambulance during their session, plastic, silent, with working doors. Eli recoiled at first. Then slowly he reached for it. He opened the back doors, pulled out the stretcher, and placed a plastic figure inside, a figure with curly hair. He whispered something. The therapist leaned closer. "What did you say, Eli?" He looked up. "They didn't take Duke to the same place." She froze. "What place?" He looked down again. "They said Duke was too noisy." The pieces were falling into place. Whoever ran this operation didn't just move children, they sorted them, separated them. Dana circled names on the clipboard. The ones crossed out, unaccounted for. The ones untouched, likely still out there, still alive. That evening, Agent Collins called from the FBI task force. "Sheriff Brooks," he said, "we ran facial analysis from the Polaroid you found in the chapel. And? The second child is a 96% match for Duke Jensen. We also picked up another face in the photo. Background, corner reflection. We just ID'd him. Name's Marcus Dillard." "Who's he?" "Knox's old cellmate, convicted of kidnapping in 2009. He was released last year on parole." Dana gritted her teeth. "Where is he now?" "That's the bad news. He's off-grid. But we've got a hit on his vehicle, an RV registered under a false name. It was spotted 2 days ago near Coldwater County, 40 miles south of you." Dana's heart kicked into high gear. She looked at Scout. "We're going hunting," she said. Before heading out, she made one stop, Eli's hospital room. She knelt beside him, eye level. "Eli," she said gently, "we're going to look for Duke. You remember Duke, right?" He nodded slowly. "We think he might still be out there." Eli's lip trembled. "Will Scout go too?" Dana smiled. "Of course. He wouldn't go without you." Eli reached for Scout's paw. Tell him Duke doesn't like the cold." Dana nodded, eyes glassy. "I'll tell him, sweetheart, I promise." Coldwater County was vast, rural, off the map. She and Scout drove in a department SUV, windows down, radio off. Dana's deputy followed a few minutes behind. They were halfway up an old mining road when Scout barked sharply, then jumped at the window. "What is it, boy?" He spun, panted, scratched at the door. Dana slowed the vehicle. They'd passed an RV, white, dusty, with out-of-state plates, tucked behind a fallen billboard advertising a long-abandoned trout lodge. She threw the car in reverse. The RV had no curtains, just darkened windows. And in one, a small handprint. Sheriff Dana Brooks cut the headlights. The RV sat still in the gravel turnout, its once white paint now a chalky yellow, flecked with tree sap and rust. The windows were tinted but not dark enough. You could see outlines, movement behind the curtains. Scout was already growling low in the back seat, hackles up, his head pressed to the window. She called it in. Unit 3 to base. Possible location on suspect Marcus Dillard. White RV, plate matches, partial Idaho registration from Bolo. Request backup to mile marker 12 off Ridgeback Road near the old Trout Lodge sign. Proceed silent. Then she looked at Scout. You ready? He didn't wait for a leash. By the time Deputy Wallace arrived, Dana already had eyes on the side door. Scout stood beside her, his muscles rigid, tail pointed like a compass. We got movement, Wallace whispered. Front passenger seat, someone ducked. Dana drew her weapon. Then they know we're here. She moved forward with Scout, her boots crunching dry leaves and gravel. At 10 feet, the barking started. Not Scout's. A second dog inside. High-pitched, panicked. Dana motioned to Wallace. Back door. He nodded and circled wide. She reached the side door, hand hovering near the latch. Then, one loud bang from inside. A child's scream. Dana didn't wait. She kicked the door. The RV exploded into chaos. Scout lunged inside first, past a pair of folding chairs and a cooler. Dana followed, gun drawn. In the back of the RV, a man scrambled to his feet. Tall, wiry, bearded, with sunken eyes and a cracked lip. A handgun shook in his hand. Don't move, Dana yelled. Put it down! He didn't. He aimed. Scout didn't give him a chance. The German shepherd leapt, jaws clamping down on the man's forearm, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. The suspect screamed and thrashed, but Scout held firm. Wallace entered through the back door seconds later. Hands up, now. They cuffed him while Scout kept a growl low in his throat, eyes locked on the man who'd raised a weapon in a room with a child. Because yes, there was a child. In the corner of the RV, huddled inside a sleeping bag, was a little boy. Curly brown hair, big eyes, mute with fear. It was Duke, alive. Thin, pale, but alive. Dana holstered her weapon and knelt. Hey there, buddy, she said softly. My name's Dana. You're safe now. He stared at her, lips pressed shut. Then he looked at Scout. And something in him shifted. He crawled forward, cautiously at first, then faster, and buried his face into Scout's neck. Scout didn't move. He just stood there, letting the boy shake in his fur. Dana swallowed hard and hit her radio. Child recovered. Confirmed ID. Condition stable. Request medevac and child trauma response team. Wallace checked the suspect's pockets. He's got IDs and burner phones. Same setup as the last one. Dana turned back to the child. Duke, we're gonna take you somewhere warm. You hungry? He didn't answer, but he nodded. At the hospital, Duke wouldn't speak to anyone but Scout. He wouldn't eat unless Scout was nearby. Wouldn't sleep unless the dog was under the bed. It was like the shepherd was a living shield between Duke and the rest of the world. Dana let it happen. She knew better than to push a child who'd been through that kind of silence. Sometimes it wasn't about what a kid said. It was what they remembered in their bones. While doctors examined Duke, Dana sat with Agent Collins in the hallway. You're lucky, Collins said, flipping through the files. You caught him before the next transfer. Dana frowned. Transfer? Collins nodded. Dillard was on a 10-day rotation. RV meets a second vehicle, passes the child off, then wipes the RV clean and cycles back. That clipboard you found? Those names weren't just victims, they were inventory. She felt sick. You said Duke was next? Collins tapped his notes. Yeah, according to digital timestamps from the burner phone, the next handoff was scheduled for tonight. Dana exhaled slowly. Then we got there just in time. Duke's fingerprints confirmed everything. He was Duke Jensen, missing from Kansas foster care for 214 days. His case, like Eli's, had been filed away, dormant, unresolved, until Scout sniffed out the silence. Dana watched through the glass as Duke held onto the dog like a lifeline. Then she noticed something else. He had something clutched in his hand, a plastic dinosaur, just like Eli's. The boys had been together, at least for part of it, and someone, maybe another child, maybe Duke himself, had given Eli the toy to hold on to. Proof that someone still cared. 2 days later, Dana stood with Rachel Monroe, Eli's mom, as the hospital prepared to reunite the boys. Eli was sitting up now, more alert, even speaking in full sentences when prompted. But nothing had brought him fully back. Until Duke walked in. The two boys stared at each other for a long moment. Then, without a word, Eli climbed out of bed and crossed the room. He handed the dinosaur back to Duke, and Duke hugged him. Scout lay between them, still watching, guarding, like always. That night, back at the station, Dana updated the board one last time. The network wasn't done. There were other names on the clipboard, other kids still out there. But the chain had broken, and Scout had been the one to snap it. Before locking up for the night, Dana knelt beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You remember everything, don't you?" Scout licked her hand, and maybe, just maybe, that was his answer. The hospital smelled like lemon cleaner and microwaved soup. It was the middle of the night, but Sheriff Dana Brooks wasn't sleeping. Neither was Scout. The German Shepherd lay in the hallway outside Duke's hospital room, alert, but calm. Inside, Duke and Eli slept soundly for the first time in days. No nightmares, no nurses checking vitals, just quiet. Peaceful. Dana sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup and scrolled through the latest update from the FBI task force. 4 names from the clipboard had been connected to open missing children's reports across 3 states. 2 boys, 2 girls. All vanished under different circumstances. All now believed to have passed through the same hands. What had once seemed like an isolated act of cruelty was unraveling into something systemic, coordinated, and horrifying. Earlier that afternoon, Duke had undergone a full medical scan. Doctors were checking for signs of long-term trauma, malnourishment, anything hidden. What they found shocked everyone. Another chip. Smaller than a grain of rice embedded just under the skin near his left shoulder blade. Not a medical device, not anything sanctioned. It was industrial, same as Eli's. But this one was different. It had a serial number. Dana stood beside the radiologist when the image came up. The number was partially degraded, but still readable. "Can we trace that?" she asked. "We'll try," he said. But someone went through a lot of trouble to make sure this wasn't linked to anything official. That didn't stop her from trying. With help from the FBI's cyber division, the chip was traced to a supplier in Nevada, legally sold to a veterinary logistics provider that had since been deregistered. The buyer? A shell company. The address? A warehouse in Colorado. It was a lead. And more importantly, it was proof. Proof that someone had tried to catalog these children like property. And proof that Scout hadn't just found Eli by chance. He had remembered a scent, a pattern. A crime he'd encountered once before and never let go of. This wasn't instinct. This was memory. 3 days later, a coordinated multi-agency raid hit the Colorado facility. Inside were shipping containers, false walls, and compartments lined with old EMT gurneys. They found crates of burner phones, paperwork, dozens of photos, and 6 more tracking chips. No children, not that day. But they found what they needed. Names, routes, dates, a blueprint of the operation. And at the center of it all? Tyrell Knox, the fake medic who had left Eli behind like trash in the woods. Back in Pine Hollow, Dana stood on the hospital roof at sunrise, watching the sky go pink over the pines. Scout sat beside her, leaning into her leg like he always did. "You did it, buddy," she whispered. "You remembered what no one else could." He blinked slowly like he understood, because maybe he did. Duke and Eli were placed in trauma-informed foster care together. Their parents weren't ready to take them home yet. Doctors said the boys needed structure, therapy, and time to heal. But they had each other. And they had Scout. He visited them once a week, sometimes more. The boys didn't talk about what happened. But they didn't need to. They played in silence, drew pictures, held hands when they walked, and always, Scout was beside them. A living bridge between their past and their future. 3 months later, the Pine Hollow courthouse was packed wall to wall. The town mayor stepped up to the podium, straightened his notes, and cleared his throat. "Every so often," he began, "a story comes along that reminds us who we are, what we value, and how one act of loyalty can change the course of countless lives." He gestured to the front of the crowd, where Scout sat in his best K9 vest, tail wagging, ears perked. And sometimes that act doesn't come from a human being. Sometimes it comes from a 4-legged hero who refuses to let the silence win. The mayor pinned a medal to Scout's vest. A standing ovation followed. Dana tried to keep her composure, but the lump in her throat wouldn't go down. Scout didn't seem to notice. He just looked back toward the boys, who clapped with tears in their eyes, and wagged his tail. The following morning, Dana made the decision she'd been wrestling with since the case ended. She pulled Scout's retirement paperwork from her drawer and signed it. He had more than earned it, and she knew exactly where he needed to be. Scout now lives full-time with Eli and Duke. Their foster parents call it guardianship, but the boys just say Scout belongs with them. And truth be told, Dana agrees. She visits often, sometimes with files to drop off, sometimes just to bring snacks. But mostly she watches. Watches as two boys who were once lost in the dark begin to laugh again. Watches as a German shepherd, who once carried trauma in his bones, now sleeps peacefully at the foot of their bed. Watches as silence gives way to healing. Because in the end, Scout didn't just find Eli. He gave him back. And in doing so, he helped break open something far bigger than any one case. He cracked a system wide open. All because he refused to ignore a bark, a scent, a sound, a memory. All because he remembered. Thank you for following this story to the end. Stories like Scout's remind us that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the ones who can't speak are the ones who hear the truth the loudest. If you believe animals like Scout deserve to be honored, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where courage walks on four legs. What would you have done if you were the one who found that ambulance in the woods? Let us know in the comments below.